Today is November 17th, 2011. I'm Charles Lundquist. Today's production will be a little bit different. Rather than an interview, it'll be more of a conversation. My colleague here, David DeVorkin, and I are going to have a conversation, not call it an interview.
Okay.
Well, would you like to start out by telling us what brought you to Huntsville and why you're here at UAH?
Well, more than anything, you brought me to Huntsville.
All right.
I'm working on the history of the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory. And you were the assistant director for science, of course, from 62 to 72. And as I've been working in this history, I realized that you were more than just another person at the observatory, but we're a central figure, making things work, making projects work. And so even though Huntsville has always been the capital for me for how we got into space, I decided, well, no, I'll really focus on you. So that's why I'm here. I've been enjoying the use of your archives, the library, and everything that you've deposited in the library downstairs. And we've been having interviews, so that's why I'm here.
Well, I'm very honored when you say that. Both of us share an interest in Fred Whipple.
Right.
I did a paper on him a few years ago on his work as a pioneer in the space program and how he and von Braun and Van Allen and a handful of other people really were the spokesmen for the beginning of the space program.
Absolutely.
And we share that common interest.
Absolutely. I've been interested in Whipple for many reasons, and if you like, I could describe those sorts of things. Well, certainly he always was the one person who defied trends in astronomy, being tuned into problems in the solar system, asking questions about what is the solar system. In ways that other people didn't ask. When most astronomers went out into the universe beyond the solar system and started studying the galaxy and other galaxies beyond and the nature of the origins of the universe, Whipple pretty much stayed home and discovered that we don't know very much about our own solar system. He found new components to the solar system. He was the first one to show in the 1930s that meteors that hit us all the time don't come from interstellar space, which is what was thought up to that time, but in fact are captured bodies in the solar system. So he realized there had to be a reservoir of these things out there somewhere that was yet to be discovered. So there was parts of the solar system of fundamentally different character that he had not seen yet. He was a graduate student at Berkeley in the 1920s when Pluto was discovered. And being an orbit specialist, certainly a fine mathematician, he and another grad student were given the assignment of producing the first useful orbit for the planet Pluto. And that always stuck with him all his life, as far as I can tell. He discovered comets, as you know. And then, of course, was the person who built the new Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory at Harvard starting in 1955. And that's after he came out with his dirty snowball theory and all of that sort of thing. But I think as time went on and I got more and more into Fred Whipple, I became fascinated that here is the only elite astronomer in the United States who was utterly fascinated and had a passion for space travel. And I mean, even in my own life, I grew up thinking they were linked. Astronomy and space travel, astronomy and space travel. And in Whipple, it's the only place, actually, the only astronomer where they were linked. Every other astronomer was not particularly passionate or driven by the idea of being a spacefaring people. But Whipple was.
Somehow or other, von Braun and Whipple became very close friends.
Absolutely.
And they collaborated on various things. The series of articles in Collier's was one of their collaborations. But
that's right.
They were both involved in the orbiter project from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very interesting thing. Maybe you have some remarks on the orbiter project.
Well, absolutely, I do. Partly to say that I don't think the whole story is out there yet. I'm personally interested in how did Whipple and von Braun and the others like Willy Ley, Chesley Bonestel, all of them form this informal little group. I mean, the stories so far have been, of course, that the Colliers people put it all together. But in the case of Orbiter, that is an even more interesting one. And I know you've talked about Orbiter on earlier installments of this ongoing series of interviews. And so understanding that it's there, it's basically a very interesting phenomenon where you have these visionaries coming together, all with some shared interests and some that are unique interests unto themselves. And in most cases, it's pretty clear what various interests are. Strangely enough, with Whipple, I find him still a bit enigmatic. What was propelling him to get so deeply involved at that time? The tracking made all the sense in the world. He was setting up photographic triangulation stations as early as the 1930s. He was the first one to use synchronized choppers to be able to improve his data and get meteor trail tracking, tracking wide fields, being able to capture the behavior of things traveling through our atmosphere. So it's clear from that end what was compelling Whipple. But to do it with such a deep passion and in such a global way, seeing Orbiter as the beginning of an entire space program, something that I'm still struggling with. So it would really be that link between Whipple and von Braun that I would like to know better. Maybe you can help me.
Well, I know they were very good friends.
Yeah.
I believe von Braun probably introduced me to Whipple at an early flight of the Redstone.
See, they're right there as a piece of history.
But clearly they were very, very good friends and communicated very, very well.
I can see some similarities.
Oh yes, very much so.
Certainly in their dreams, in their passion. To a certain extent, I think I've been convinced now that von Braun was sincerely interested in astronomy.
Oh, he was?
Yeah. He had a telescope.
Well, he founded the observatory here in Huntsville.
Ah, really? The one on this campus?
No, the one up on the mountain, the von Braun Observatory.
I didn't even know there was one.
Yeah, there is one.
Oh, that's where I'm going tomorrow.
he was the moving motivation for there being an observatory here in Huntsville.
When did he build that?
Well, shortly after he got here.
Oh, that's
he
marvelous.
and his friends.
Uh-huh.
There was a gentleman named Wilhelm Angela,
Mm-hmm.
who was a superb machinist, or well, more than that, model maker of all kinds.
Uh-huh.
Angela could build anything, and including rockets, of course. That's what his job was. But Angela got very interested in helping do the observatory, and having one of the best people working with mechanical systems in the world, helping to build the thing that.
And this is up on Mount Sado?
Yeah, Mount Sado, yeah.
Yeah, my heavens. Is it accessible?
Yeah, sure.
It's a public observatory.
Well, it's run by a club,
Mm-hmm.
or an association, I guess
Well, that's marvelous.
they have open houses and invite people up to use the, see things and so forth.
And that was his purpose.
Yeah.
Oh, that's delightful. That's delightful.
There are pictures of him helping pouring concrete for it and so forth.
I'd like to see those pictures. Are they here in the building?
Yeah, we'd probably find some.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, what convinced me was that Mike Neufeld had found records of his postcards back to his parents.
Oh.
And the first time that he visited Los Angeles, his whole push was to go up to Mount Wilson. He wanted to see where the modern universe was discovered.
Right.
And I said, yep, that did it.
I can believe that, all right.
Anybody who would go up that crazy road, it's a very, very narrow road with rocks coming down on you all the time. Yeah. But, it's clear. Anybody who would think of that, going to Los Angeles before Hollywood and Vine, really had to be sincere. And that's when I said, oh, okay, great.
Fred also had a very, almost a passion, I would say, for international affairs and relationships. In setting up the tracking program, he negotiated with people from all over the world to put tracking stations there. And he was, of course, a good friend of Lovell's in England.
ACB Lovell, that's right.
And the
Jodrell Bank.
And so forth. So he always took a strong interest in international affairs of all kinds.
And my appreciation of that is that he was sincerely a sort of a universalist.
I think he was, yes.
Yeah. But he also knew that no single or solitary dependence on various centers of power was always dangerous. And he liked to distribute his power base, and especially his ability to use the Europeans. And this is something I hope we're going to talk about a little more, and that is the struggle that you had to keep all of that data about Smithsonian Standard Earth unclassified.
I'll tell you about some of that later.
Oh, okay. But that's a very, very poignant and very important part of the history, and one that I know will be a central issue, because the Smithsonian has long been bumping up against that classified barrier, and it has been a very subtle. It's been a very subtle element in the importance of the Smithsonian on an international basis. I mean, what I find fascinating is the Smithsonian has an astrophysical observatory, and you know that today it's a collection of 19 museums, 6 or 7 major research centers, of which SAO is one, and it's spread all over the world. It's on literally just about every continent in one way or another.
Yeah, maybe you should say a word or two when you finish that about your role there.
Well, sure, I can do that. But the Smithsonian itself, historically, from its beginnings in the 19th century, acted as a world coordinating center for scientific information, starting with scientific information about the United States, and then enlarging as the United States' purview enlarged, to being a coordinating center for science information, and for both the increase and the diffusion of that information, which is in its mandate, around the world. Now, when I look and see that the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory existed for 50 years on the National Mall, studying the sun, and they had international networks of people observing the sun all over the world so they could keep a continuous record. But in no way did they involve the host countries in that work. It was just outstations everywhere. They moved to Harvard now in '55. Whipple, in a way, recreates this worldwide network. Not at the same stations, completely different, but it's the idea of a network. But this time it is in the spirit of the International Geophysical Year. All countries are participating officially. They had to say, why don't you put one of your satellite tracking stations here? Why don't you put it here? Why don't you put it here? And then it was a choice of what was the best geographical distribution. But in essence, it came out to be the same thing. And that was a perfect model, both for the institution and for, as you described, Whipple's own sensibilities. So you don't normally see these things coming together as nicely as they do. But he was the right person at the right time.
A byproduct of that was his policy of making the observatory available for summer visitors from all over the world. And
oh, yeah.
Many, many, many prominent people came and spent their summers.
That's right. And there's good reason for that. Harvard long had that tradition. Shapley, Howell Shapley, would have summer schools in astronomy. And they invited, at first, American students, of course, but it was very important to bring foreign astronomers to Harvard, and it increased in the 30s as the need for foreign scientists in Europe especially increased for their safety. Many of them had to, of course, leave rather precipitously as the Nazi regime grew. So Harvard was always that sort of a international place. Shapley was very much an international person, and Whipple grew up under Harlow Shapley. Mm-hmm. So that's, I think he was continuing that tradition.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, there is a consistency there. Harvard itself was really a dual camp, and in fact it was almost a warring camp post-World War II under Shapley. Shapley was very much the humanist, almost the conscientious objector. Some of the people who were working closely with him were, and they were very much of that ilk. Then there were those like Whipple and Menzel and others who were very, very interested in improving and strengthening the role of science in the national security state, in defending America from whatever, that was true. And those two groups didn't work very well together. Politically, it was an unstable climate when Smithsonian came in. And what I'm interested in is how Smithsonian stabilized it under Whipple. Because Whipple was far, far more able to manage disparate organizations than others, but always behind the scenes.
He had interesting experience during World War II working on chaff.
Absolutely, chief of chaff.
Yep.
Yeah. Did he talk to you about
Oh, yeah, sure. He was proud of what he had done during the war on developing chaff as a safety measure, a way to divert radars and so forth.
Exactly. Yeah. We one of our curators collected the machine.
Oh, really?
That was in his office. He would show this machine that would be, I guess, mounted in the fuselage of an airplane, and then thin aluminum foil would come through, and they'd roll it out, and it would chop these things. It was like a shredder.
Yeah, like a right wavelength.
Exactly. The length was critical for the different wavelengths, to confuse the wavelengths or confuse the transmissions. And yeah, he had the instrument right there. He carried it to the European theater, and he, just like Van Allen. Van Allen worked on the proximity fuse in World War II, and did more than just be a team member developing it. He carried it to the fleet. He actually took a commission in the Navy and carried it to the fleet for implementation. Whipple did very much the same thing with the flak generator. Yeah, that was quite something. That was his real coming out party. Yes. That's when he realized that he really he worked best on this larger stage. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, very much so. He was, I would say, sort of impatient with local politics at Harvard.
Oh yeah,
I see. He much more wanted to work in the international scene and the big picture, and this petty argument at Harvard within the Harvard machinery sort of annoyed him, or took up time that he didn't want to spend.
That's very
on that
helpful.
Kind of thing.
That's very, very that's a very good observation. And of course, he was acting that way when you were there.
Sure.
Did you ever come back and complain about the latest Harvard president?
Oh yeah, well maybe not the president so much, but as the council, the Harvard Astronomy Council, and it's.
Oh, the Harvard Council. Okay. Well, that's real local politics. Yeah. I mean, there's also the Harvard Corporation.
Yeah, well, that... He didn't suffer or tolerate bureaucracy very well. For example, NASA tried, and NSF too probably, tried to impose on him the usual thing that reports and papers have to be reviewed by a sponsoring organization. Mm-hmm. He absolutely refused to do that. said, we're just going to do them as we get them done. We'll put them out and send you a copy.
You mean literally publish them?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's right.
And the NASA didn't like it. DOD didn't like it. None of the federal funding agencies liked it. And he just stood firm and said, that's the way we're going to do it.
He couldn't change NASA. He just did it because NASA still does that.
NASA just learned to go along with it. That's what Whipple was going to do.
On his case, yeah. Yeah, I was just on a panel of speakers in Cleveland, and one of the people was late in getting his paper to it because it had to be cleared. I said, what? But this is a paper about history. History of, nothing sensitive here. It's just a good story, a good narrative and everything, because we had read it, but he couldn't present it until it had been approved by somebody who didn't have any idea or knowledge of the subject matter.
Yeah, well,
I can see that.
Fred just absolutely refused to go along with that, and it was either do it his way or not at all.
Well, I think he had some clout because the Smithsonian doesn't do that.
Right.
And this was a Smithsonian operation.
Right. So he had help there.
That's right.
NASA coughed every time, but there wasn't anything they could do about it.
Well, that's great when you can get yourself in a position like that.
Yeah. He had the clout to do it. You put it correctly.
Mm-hmm. But he also seemed to have the intelligence to know how to do it and use that clout correctly.
Yeah. He didn't let anything wild go out.
Mm-hmm. So there was internal review.
Yeah, there were reasonable, but not excessive.
Well, that was also a tradition in astronomy. The old system in astronomy was that the director of the observatory had to review everything before it went out. So there's nothing new there. And in some cases, that could be a real pain because the director could disagree as an individual with the scientific results or whatever. I don't think Whipple was never constrained in that way by Shapley.
He never got that.
And no, he never did it himself,
no.
I'm sure. And he was never constrained by his own director when he was under Shapley. There's no evidence of that. But at other observatories, it was certainly the case. Where he got his degree when he worked at Lick Observatory, there were a lot of constraints. And I think he knew that world and didn't like it.
He didn't like it at all.
No, nor would I. Although sometimes I'd say it's nice to have an institution that's protecting you from writing something totally crazy. But that's usually not their intent.
He had the best of both worlds in a sense by having a federal appropriation through the Smithsonian as well as the Harvard attachment.
That's right.
And he could play either side depending on what the case was he was handling.
I've seen it referred to in some cases as a Brinksmanship technique. Would you agree with that?
I wouldn't quite have called it that, but what the federal appropriation did was let him, if he saw an opportunity to strike out into something new, he could do it without any further review. He could just on his own decision decide that's good to do and do it.
With federal money.
With federal money.
But then he could turn around and say, well, I have this project, and because I know he did this at one point, and turn to, let's say, private patrons at Harvard and say, they need a place to live. They need a building.
Yeah.
And say, how about building a building and naming yourself after it?
Yeah.
And putting my federal employees in that building.
Right.
And that happened more than once.
Yes. He knew how to play both sides of the street very well.
Maybe that's the better term, because I've been using the term Brinksmanship, but that's always on the precipice, Yeah. But he was probably more comfortable in his work than that. Now, some people working for him may not have fully understood that. Yeah. Did he always make his intentions clear to you when he asked you to take care of major projects? And of course, while you were working for him, you were taking care of everything.
Yeah, no, he would give me, no, get this done. like building the Mount Hopkins Observatory. Now, he made the decision to do it, and then a bunch of the rest of us implemented it.
But were his ultimate goals clear, or did you ever know them, or was it he was always straightforward in what he wanted? For instance, somebody would say, well, yes, I want Mount Hopkins to be built to study a certain type of astronomical phenomena.
Now, he wanted a good observing site for all purposes.
For all purposes. That's consistent.
Which fit his character.
Yeah. Because in a way, I think he would have been very comfortable building a astronomical satellite for as many purposes as possible.
Oh, yes, indeed. Something like the Hubble telescope with its multiple capabilities fit his feelings exactly.
Wow, yeah.
If he had had an opportunity to build a telescope like that, he'd have jumped at it.
Of course, one of his counterparts, Lyman Spitzer, was the one who did in many, many different ways.
And they were friends, and I'm sure Fred didn't want to compete with him, so when Lyman did it, Fred was supportive of his doing it.
Yeah. That's another very important aspect, I think, of Fred Whipple's career, is that he looked carefully at different problem areas and opportunities where he thought he could make a contribution more than anybody else that he knew was in the field. And because at the various meetings he would call after Sputnik flew, it was quite clear, what can we do that other people can't do? And let's do that. So you'd say that's very consistent.
That's consistent, yes.
Yeah.
He was happy to endorse good work by other people and support it. Spitzer's a good example.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, Spitzer was one of the others who responded strongly for the orbiting astronomical observatory.
Right.
Whipple, Spitzer, Code, those people.
Yeah.
An interesting time, huh?
Very interesting time. You were going to tell a little bit about your role at Smithsonian.
Oh, okay. I'm officially the senior curator for astronomy and for the space sciences. Senior is a grade level. That's all that means. It's not managerial, but it does allow me a certain range of activities, but not different than any other curator. And that is primarily in building up collections of instruments, in my case, that are related to conduct of astronomy in space and the conduct of any kind of scientific activities in space. In order for me to collect intelligently, I'm also expected to be an active researcher, not in any one narrow field particularly, but in a broad area of the history of science and in the areas that I'm collecting. So I have to be knowledgeable of space science, of astronomy during this period, and also be able to appreciate what kinds of instruments should be preserved to understand the history of this time. And then the third part of my responsibilities are to employ the research and the collections in various forms of outreach. And that outreach can be exhibits or lecture series or any kinds of ways to bring to the public in digestible packages, but still authoritative, the endeavor that we represent, which is America's scientific heritage. So that's basically my responsibility.
That's a big responsibility.
Yeah, I've been doing it for 30 years and enjoy it immensely. Pretty much doing the same thing, but sometimes taking on different niches. Right now, very happy that Roger Launius is with us, an excellent, very, very capable curator who has taken over the planetary sciences collection.
I see.
And in the past, Alan Edel had taken over the geophysics collection, but I got it back when he took over the manned spaceflight, one of those manned spaceflight collections.
Who has the Skylab?
Skylab right now is curated by Valerie Neal, which is right in the middle of a number of things, but we share Skylab. I curate all of the scientific instruments and the scientific practices with Skylab, and she curates the space station aspects of Skylab. So the Apollo telescope mount, for instance, and all of its instruments are things I worry about and try to make as best preserved as possible, both the history and the material heritage of Skylab. And she is most interested in preserving the human environment and how the human environment was established and preserved. And she's also the space shuttle curator, so she has a big job. Very big job. And when you have very large collections like that, also very, very demanding and politically very visible, it takes a lot of time.
Yes.
I'm happily spared. At least I feel spared. I feel very fortunate that this is the field I love the most. Anything based on astronomy or related to astronomy. And there are not too many other people pulling and tugging and seem to be reasonably happy with us taking care of it.
What other things do you think we should chat about while we have the opportunity? I've been asking you various questions, and anything you'd like to talk about.
What compels you to be so helpful to historians?
I guess an appreciation of history.
Mm-hmm. Why is history important to you?
I guess an appreciation of history is part of being mature.
Yes, I didn't turn to history until I was in my 30s, late 30s.
Yeah, I didn't get very much into history until a good deal later than that.
Well, yeah, you were a good deal more busy, too.
But then I began to appreciate that history needs to be preserved for the future and not make the same mistakes twice.
Well, hopefully history can help.
Yeah,
hopefully if people will listen.
If people will listen.
History is useless if people don't read, if people don't pick up on it,
that
sort of thing. What do you do to encourage the use of the history here by the public, by the students? What can be done?
Well, one way that encouraged students, they were the vice president for research here, let it be known to the students that if they got a abstract accepted for the International Astronautical Congress meetings, twice now, that he would support their going to the meetings. And a number of them...
That's pretty good.
Yeah, a number of them used the resources of the archives here to prepare their papers and got them accepted and got to go last time to South Africa, the previous time to the Czech Republic.
Well, that's pretty impressive. I mean, if they were meeting in Cleveland, I don't think that would be any great supply. But how many students went to South Africa?
I think it was about 10.
2. That's quite generous.
Yes.
Now, of course, the vice president did that completely on his own?
Pretty much.
Really? What compelled him to do that, do you think?
Well, he's absolutely convinced that participating in things like that is an important part, particularly of graduate education.
How true.
And he's absolutely right.
He's absolutely right, yeah.
And so he acted on his understanding of that was part of education. And those kids that, I shouldn't call them kids, but those people that did those came back very much more mature after going to a meeting and presenting a paper.
Yeah.
It really was a big piece of their education.
People have been becoming more and more aware that support is needed for sending students to national meetings, to international meetings, and in some areas, especially in the sciences, that message is getting through and it is getting supported. But in the history of science, which is my field, history of science and technology primarily, it's a little more difficult trying to convince funding sources. And we just have to make better arguments, I think. Because we have a number of meetings, like every other year at Notre Dame, we have historians from all over the world of astronomy, particularly, get together for a workshop. And we realized over the last 20 years, we're getting older. You know,
that happens.
Yeah,
it really
strange
does.
enough, it just sort of happens.
We do get old.
Yeah, and where are the young people, and are they interested? Turns out they are. I had a young grad student working with me, and we looked at where do the theses come from, the PhD theses, in the history of science and history of astronomy particularly. And they come from all over the place. And so why aren't these people attending? We asked them, they said, we don't have any money. And Notre Dame is not an expensive place to have a meeting. In fact, that's why we meet there. But you still have to get there. So we've been still looking for that kind of funding. But obviously your vice president, he's a vice president.
Yeah.
Yeah. He appreciates that. And that's a gift. It's a wonderful gift.
Yeah. For example, at the meeting in South Africa last month or 2 months ago, one of the students did a biography or a biography, I guess, of Walter Hauserman, who had recently died.
Yes.
And so he spent hours downstairs digging out stuff on Hauserman and so forth.
Will these be published?
Yeah.
In the Astronautica?
Yeah.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And when I get home, I'll ask my colleagues who went to the IAF specifically how the students made a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, because those are big meetings.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I've been to lots of them.
The history is just part of it.
Yes.
And it's quite an exciting sort of experience, I think, for a student.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, boy. What was the first scientific meeting that you went to? First professional meeting?
Probably the AAAS meeting on the V2 launches in 1947 at the AAAS.
Yeah. That was in Chicago?
Yeah, it was in Chicago.
Yeah. How'd you get there at the time?
We drove.
Mm-hmm. How many of you?
Oh, about half a dozen went from South Dakota.
Mm-hmm. Were you all members of the AAAS or student members?
Yeah.
Was there a particular professor who
No, we just
stimulated?
went.
Oh, that's great. This is the group you were telling me about who you'd study together.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. That is wonderful.
We just picked up and went to Chicago and went to the meeting. Attended all kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, did you? I mean, that meeting was chaired by J. Robert Oppenheimer.
Yes.
Did you actually meet him?
I didn't meet him, but I sat there and listened to it. Interesting thing, he went to set the timer. And he couldn't get it to work. And he said, is there anybody in here that knows how to run one of these things? Man that built the atomic bomb couldn't get the timer to work.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. Yeah, well, that's not surprising.
Yeah.
I take it somebody helped him.
Oh, yeah, sure. There were plenty of people that could get
Do you
the timer.
remember, did Van Allen speak at that?
No, he did not.
Who were the people or do you remember any of them?
I've got the program downstairs if you want to see it.
Well, I think we better go to the archive and have a look.
I guess we can. Maybe we should call this enough then.
Thank
Well, thank you very much for coming.
You. Yeah, I'm delighted.